Carolyn, and the various organizations that are part of the coalition so that we can visualize the thing that we all experience every day when we go to the subway, when we go shopping, when we take our kid out, when we walk the dog, that thing that we experience on the streets of Harlem and we feel. I have been working on visualizing with data that comes from various state governmental agencies. So, first of all, a little bit about who we are. We are currently over 20 organizations that have come together. If you are a part of an organization, whether it's a block association, a faith-based organization, a tenants group, an owners group, whatever it is that is not a member of the Greater Harlem Coalition, see me afterwards. I'd be very happy to talk to you about joining in. And we have decided to take a big picture look at Harlem as a whole. I think many of us have experienced where we've seen that various programs will be somebody will try to cite one over here. They get a little pushback, they move it a couple of blocks over here, they get a little pushback. In other words, it's a kind of a shell game, and we find that a lot of these things sort of move around. And I wanted to take a look at Harlem for CB9, CB10, and Community Board 11 holistically, so we can see the kind of the big picture, not just what's happening on our block or on our street, but what's happening in Harlem as a whole. So, part of what we have done as a coalition is we have declared a moratorium on additional substance abuse facilities in our community. We firmly believe, as Sadiria was saying earlier on, that as neighbors we completely support and understand the right of people who are struggling with addiction to get the services that they need. But however, we know that the policy of addiction service providers to routinely cite their programs in low-income communities of color has led to an intolerable oversaturation in our community.
Amen.
And Sadiria had mentioned this idea of fair share. This is not just our own idea.
That's right.
The idea of fair share comes from the New York City Council. And this is a document that quotes from a document that they produced in 2017. And as you can see, if you're reading through this, that they also agree that essentially low-income communities and communities of color still see far more than their fair share of unwanted land uses, many of which we know and experience on a regular basis. So, I set out the task to kind of visualize what does this look like? What does an unfair share actually look like? And the first thing I took a look at were mental health facilities, programs, places where people come for support and services, and I mapped that, and this was information that comes from the New York City databases and also from New York State databases. And this is the map I was able to produce of northern Manhattan, the South Bronx, and parts of Queens, etc., that you can see here. And if you look at this map, I think you see that in many communities, the dots are fairly evenly spread out. You know, they're kind of one here, one there, but I'm sure your eyes are drawn to the various clusters that we have. You also probably, as New Yorkers, recognize where some of those clusters are. We have some hospital concentrations. So the New York Presbyterian Columbia University Hospital is a concentration of mental health facilities. If you're familiar with the South Bronx, you probably recognize Lincoln Hospital Complex down there. But what is interesting, in our community, the mental health facilities are not associated with our hospitals. So if you look directly at Metropolitan, you look at Harlem Hospital, there's no sort of concentration there at all. We have a very sort of different model in our community, which is basically that these facilities are primarily located in our commercial corridors. They occupy retail space, first floor, sometimes second floor, and you'll probably recognize that the 124th Street, 125th Street concentration, you'll probably notice an Adam Clayton Powell line here, and of course the incredible concentration around the Metro North Station or Lennox 125 Station, which is, if anyone has been there, you know what I'm talking about. So looking at this, I was able to count, and our community has 134 mental health programs in Community Board 9, 10, and 11. And as we know, one of the problems is that when clients come to these programs, they may come a little bit early, they may stay a little bit late, and they may hang out, legitimately with their friends or people that they've met, and they are often very susceptible to drugs, right? They're susceptible to pushers coming into the community because it's a large concentration of people struggling with various issues. And I also said to myself, okay, well that's interesting, that's mental health, but let's take a look at data that reflects how substance abuse facilities are located in the 5 boroughs and in our community in particular. And in order to do that, I got data that came from the Sugar Hill Concerned Neighbors Group. I see there are a couple of representatives from that organization here tonight that I've talked to. They submitted a FOIL request to the state agency. There's one agency which licenses every single substance abuse program in New York State, and that is called OASIS, the Office of Alcohol and Substance Abuse Services. And they would not release this data themselves. It took a FOIL request in order to get this data to come out. And I have taken, you can see a screenshot of some of the data in behind here, and I was able to take this data and sort of take a look at what we know of as oversaturation or unfair share. So, how does that work? So first of all, I have to look at what is the population of Harlem. So, if you never knew this, Harlem represents 4.3% of all New York. So we have 4.3% of all New Yorkers live in the 3 community boards that we represent. That's a baseline piece of data I needed to have. And the next thing I wanted to do is to look at the number, if the entire circle are all the addicts registered that are using OASIS services in New York City. And sadly, we see that although we represent only 4.3% of all New Yorkers, we also sadly represent 6.9% of all the people who are struggling with opioid addiction and are seeking services in a licensed facility. This does not include, by the way, people, either part of the circle does not include people who are going privately to their own doctor, right, and just getting services. They people going to a clinic or to a program. So 6.9%. So that then leads me to this. So if I was allocating substance abuse facilities, I would say, well, either 4.3% of all New York City's substance abuse facilities should be in Harlem because that's their proportional share in terms of population. Or I could look at actual addicts and I could say, well, Harlem has 6.9% of all the registered addicts in New York City. Perhaps we should put 6.9% of all the facilities in Harlem. Either one of those two would seem to be reasonable and logical. What we found, however, is that the number is not 6.9 or 4.3, it's actually 19.1. In other words, 1 in 5 of every methadone clinic in all of New York City is located right here. Right here.
Take the screenshot, please, folks.
You can get a copy of this presentation at Greater Harlem Coalition at gmail.com. I'll get that to you. In other words, 1 in 5 methadone programs is in our neighborhood for all of the city. So with that, you might say, okay, so if we only have 6.9% of New York's addicts, but we've got 19% of the clinics, who's using this? What's going on there? And what we find is, oops, oh, here, you might just want to hit that. And so to look at that, I took the data that OASIS had given us, and I parsed out all of the zip codes of people who are coming into Harlem for services. And we have only about 25% of all the people using Harlem clinics live in Harlem. 75% of every person that you see going into a methadone clinic in Harlem is commuting into our community for services. Some of those are not even residents of New York City. Where are they coming from? I was stunned when I created this map. I could not believe that people are coming from Bensonhurst, from Staten Island, from Lower Staten Island, from easternmost Queens. People are coming from City Island for services in our community. Now, obviously, we also see there's a high concentration of people in our community who are using services. This is that 25% you saw earlier. But look at the unbelievable number of people that are coming from the Bronx into Harlem for their methadone and services. Now, then a question is, okay, how serious is this? How serious is the issue of addiction in our community? So I took the data that comes from the Department of Health in the city, and I plotted all of the causes of death. This was data from 2015. The data has not changed very much since then. And we have approximately 7,000 deaths per year. And as you can perhaps see here, 6,700 or so are caused from various non-drug related deaths. And approximately 200 are caused by drug problems of some sort. And I asked myself, okay, well that's interesting, but what is driving this massive column here? What are those services that we as Harlemites really need in order to improve the quality of life of the residents who live here now? What are those problems? What are those health risks? And especially because we're dealing with a hospital who is going to be coming into our community, I thought it would be great to see which services we need to be healthy. And the way that that breaks down is the two major by far categories are, of course, heart disease and cancer. Absolutely stunning amounts there, 4,500 deaths per year. We also have diabetes, respiratory disease, flu, HIV, stroke, and hypertension. And each one of these categories is larger than the drug-related deaths in our community, which of course are a tragedy in and of themselves. But if I was going into a community and trying to determine what they need in that community in terms of health services, this is a piece of data that I would look at before I did anything else. What do they need? What are they suffering from? Because if it's not about the data, then what is driving that decision? That is my question. So, just to conclude, once again, we are oversaturated to a degree that would not be tolerated in other communities. And I urge each and one of you to keep this information, this idea in your brain. It's not just how you feel when you go to the subway. It's not just how you experience shopping for groceries or going to the bank or whatever it is. It's real, it's statistically shown, and we have the data now to prove that we are oversaturated. Thank you very much. Maybe you have questions. Sorry. Yes?
As far as the 6.9% of the data, where do the people who are in homeless shelters and transitional correctional facility shelters, like the big building on 124th Street,
So the question is, where do people live? Like, where is their official?
I'm sorry, where do they fall in those statistics?
So one of the issues with this is when someone goes in to get services, they have to fill out forms, as we all do when we go to medical facilities, and they give an address for their home. And they may be coming from this community or for that community. Very few people would probably have official IDs saying that their home is on Ward's Island, for example. But if they are in a longer-term shelter or they've been there for many years, they may actually at that point have government documentation which shows that they're living in a shelter. Yes, sir?
No, he's asking. Go to the mic.
Oh, could you go to this mic?
If I understand what he's asking, do you have a chart, a representation showing the homeless problem just like the substance abuse problem? Because he's saying there's a few problems here. You're focusing on substance abuse, you've also got a homeless problem. Same person.
It is much more difficult to map or to analyze homeless data. The reason is the city, so the state manages substance abuse, the city manages homeless shelters. And the city will not reveal the location of shelters. I have been able to get the name of the shelter, I've been able to get the number of people in the shelter, even the kind of shelter, but I can't actually get the location. Through a lot of Googling and intuition, I have a number of the data sets, and I will at some point in the future present that information. But I'll be very honest with you, the maps all look the same.
Is that the scope of this
It
meeting?
just all looks the same. We have over-concentrations of virtually every single social service that you can think of.
That's right.
Beyond our needs, beyond our needs. Other questions? Yes?
Hi, good evening. I'm Michelle Booker from Congressman Esbiat's office. I just wanted to respond to the gentleman's question about homeless shelters. The other challenge with homeless shelters is that a lot of people themselves have experienced trauma. So for their own personal safety, whether it's been abuse, domestic violence, whatever it is, the addresses aren't revealed without like a privacy release to protect their safety. So I just wanted to let the audience know, so it's not this thing that the city's just hiding the shelters. But that's one of the major reasons as to why it's hard to get addresses. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very good point. Thank you very much. Yes?
Who actually owns the property in question?
Who owns the property in question?
You have to come to the mic,
I'm sorry.
please. Yes, you have to come to the mic. Thank you.
I have a two-part question. but
Sure, go for it.
The first question is, who owns the property in question?
Okay. Who owns the places where these programs are situated?
That's why I would like to open up the facility.
They will talk to more about that, but it's another owner, and they are leasing that space, if I understand that correctly.
Parquet Management.
I'm sorry?
Parquet Management.
Parquet Management.
They own parking garages.
Yeah.
I'll wait for them to come up and ask that question.
Okay. Any other questions? So again, you can email us at greaterharlemcoalition@gmail.com if you would like to be on the mailing list. If you would like a copy of this presentation, I'd be more than happy to share that with you. And thank you very much for your time. Oh, question last.
How long is that lease for?
I will let them answer that in a second. I'll just take ones on this. Yes, Noreen?
My question, you don't have to answer, I'm just going to put it out for everyone to think about, is that one of the things when you look at these maps of these over concentrations, it means that centers are near each other, and that when an opiate or other people who are struggling with addiction, the whole base of community centers was the idea that they'd be surrounded by well people, so there would be less temptation, there could be push away. When there starts to be concentrations, my concern is we're blowing up the whole well-based thinking about that, and making vulnerable people more vulnerable, because we haven't overlaid yet the criminal element that feeds on vulnerable populations.
So looking at all your data sets, right, and the concentration of where everything is it possible that some of this is bought into, like some of these communities are oversaturated due to other political issues such as who votes where? You know, how many registered voters are in a particular area or not in a particular area? Wasn't sure if your data set
Sure.
took that into account.
That's a very quick question. You know, we've all thought about this, and we've all thought about the reasons why it's here. And I think that we can probably agree that there are a couple of factors. One is just purely economic, that it's a lot cheaper to build in this community than it is in the Upper East Side, for example. It's lower cost real estate. It is also simply that many of these organizations have a tradition or a history or a pattern of just, we always put it in Harlem, we always put it in Harlem, we always put it in Harlem. Another is, I think, you know, a well-meaning, perhaps thought on their behalf, which is, oh, those people need this, without actually having looked at whether or not we do or not, and whether that need has just been exaggerated to the point where they're kind of self-justifying placement. I also wonder, I don't know, but I wonder about collusion between the political class in our community and the economic powers of the providers that are there. And lastly, I would say that there's a kind of exploitation which is going on, and that exploitation is exploiting what I have found, and which I'm sure you have all found and know, is just the generosity of spirit that I find in Harlemites. That so many of our long-term residents have lived through the crack epidemic, the earlier heroin epidemic, all these other horrific tidal waves of drugs into this community. They've seen their own family members suffer, they've seen their neighbors suffer, and they have a generosity of spirit that people need help. And unfortunately, I think that has been overexploited to the point where we have what we have now.
Sean, I just want to add to that.
Oh, hello, Athena.
Thank you.
Athena Moore from Borough President's Office.
I speak very loud, but I will go to the mic. I just wanted to add, because it was a question about the politics of it, and there's a difference between the politics of what's happening in New York State, and the politics of what's happening in Harlem. You've had a number of the Harlem elected officials, along with the Manhattan Borough President, working actually step by step and side by side with the coalitions that are here. You've heard reference to Sugar Hill Coalition, and some of our colleagues are here. We actually organized immediately as soon as we heard that there was a number of concerns regarding the Argus decision to bring a drug treatment center into a brownstone in Sugar Hill. We mobilized, we had press conferences, we had meetings with the community board, we had meetings among the residents, we had town hall meetings, and each of the electeds, whether it was Assemblywoman Inez Dickens, whether it was Assemblyman Al Taylor, Gail Brewer, Brian Benjamin, State Senator, we had Congressman Esquire. All of us was working, and Mark Levine, Councilmember Mark Levine. So there's a heightened sensitivity in Harlem around this issue, and we met also with Oasis. We had them in the office meeting with us, just to see how we can come to some understanding about the needs. And as Sean has so eloquently put it, there are a lot of needs that are here that are not attended to. And the Borough President has continued to draw support behind this coalition, behind the Mount Morris Community Improvement Coalition, and the Sugar Hill, because we do believe that there are positive things things that we can do to meet the needs of our community that go beyond just the substance abuse needs and the mental health needs. We can't say that there is not a need for some of these services, so we always are striving for that balance between how do we work with entities that are coming into our communities. I can tell you firsthand, I had a father who passed from substance abuse and a mother who succumbed to mental illness. So the need is real. And we certainly need social services like HIV/AIDS in our community. But what we don't need is division around having services come in, and where the funding is for these services, we need to make sure that it's responsive to what we actually see reflected as our needs in the community. So I just offer that the politics are different in different places. In Harlem, the electors are united.
Yes.
But we also want to make sure that anybody who's coming in has to be accountable to this community, but we also want to do it in balance with what the data shows. So thank you, and I'm here in support.
Thank you, Athena. Thank you very much. So I'll take one more question, and then I'll pass over. Maria, did you want to?
I do, but I don't want to get up. Get up.
Okay. Anyone else? One final thing? Yeah, at the mic.
Is it okay?
Yeah, go for it.
So earlier I walked past the site in question, and it's right at the back door of the Future Great Studio Museum.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if anyone has analyzed exactly how this might impact that cultural institution and the audience that's going to be
We're
drawn
not
to
gonna
it.
touch it.
So that is interesting, and Sidurian is going to talk about that later on. Quick,
Very quick.
very quick.
First, thank you for presenting these visuals. I think that really helps us codify this in a visual way. One thing as a corollary, I think that may be helpful is if we could get a sort of a trajectory as to when a lot of these facilities were actually built. So we see that, let's for the sake of argument, that there were 25 facilities in our community. If 5 were built last year and if 10 were built the year before, if we could get sort of some sort of visual representation as to when they were built. I mean, a lot of these aren't legacy facilities.
That's a
lot of these
very
have
good
been,
question.
you know,
So what I
recently
would
built.
say is this: join with me in the coalition, and let's do another FOIL request to get that information. Yes, sir. Final thing, and then
Good evening, everybody. My name is Stanley Bleaton, and I'm Chair of Land Use for the Community Board. One of the issues, and this is coming before our board, for our committee, partnered with Sedaria and the coalition. One of the things that I would like to say is that the oversaturation is really new. We talked about politics. I was former chair of the Community Board, too. I can't tell you how many hearings I've been to at the Department of Mental Health. All right? Once they've certified a facility, there's basically almost nothing that we can do as a community. We have fought tirelessly, New York State Department of Mental Health, who funds these programs and who also, so that's one of the issues why the oversaturation comes, because once they have their hands in it, then there's, can't say there's nothing that the community can do, but it's such an uphill fight that a lot of times we just have to throw our hands up. So I just think that, that's also important when we talk about the politics of what's going on. It's the state that also has a major part in the proliferation of more and more centers coming, into the community.
thank you very much. And now I'll pass it back to Sadir.
Okay, Stanley, I have to say, we're not giving up.
No.
We're not going our hands up. What we'd like to do is introduce Brad Rexstrom again. So Mount Sinai is going to have their opportunity to speak to us. Please let everyone speak.
That's right.
Write your questions down.
That's right.
And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A. And if you've heard someone ask something similar, just think whether or not you need to ask that question again, because we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to have their questions answered. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Again, my name is Brad. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to be here this evening. Pastor McKinney, thank you for hosting this. Sedaria, it's always good to see you, and sure we'll be seeing more of you. So thank you. So I may be presenting in a little different way. The objective, what we want to do is outline to you what we have proposed. This has actually been on the table now for some time, but I'm going to fast forward a bit because this is key. Is over the past several months, we actually have had 30 plus meetings, community meetings like this, meeting with elected officials, meeting with the community board, meeting with the clergy and other groups. We have heard your concerns. And what we have done, and I don't want to mislead anybody, our plan is to move forward with a clinic on that location, but we have taken a bit of a pause. We are reevaluating, again, not reevaluating if we're going to put services there, rather reevaluating, can we clinically realign what we're proposing to better meet the needs of the community. We're not there yet. I think it's going to be a couple of months before we have those final decisions, so we will need to come back and explain any changes that we're proposing to you at that time. Sedaria asked that we have this meeting tonight to be transparent, to let you know where we're at in the process, and to repeat exactly what we're proposing. That's number one. Number two, before I continue, I want to emphasize two other things. We are not proposing a methadone clinic, period. There's a lot of misinformation on that. This is not a methadone clinic. We are not proposing it. We are not going to put a methadone clinic at this site. Not now, not in the future. Number three, that's important. We are not proposing new services. The services that we're planning to move to 124th Street already exist. And I'll get into that detail in a moment. But essentially what it is we have some services in Community Ward 11, near Mount Sinai Hospital, and we have some services in Community Ward 9, closer to Mount Sinai St. Luke's. We're losing leases on existing space, and we're proposing again to move and merge those services together. So, let us finish and then we'll do the talking, but again, emphasizing, not methadone, these are not new services. So, again, on the proposal. The site that we're proposing, again, everybody probably knows, is 158 West 124th Street. We currently have services in 3 locations. One at 1249 Fifth Avenue, near Mount Sinai, and 2 near St. Luke's at 411 West 114th Street and 440 West 114th Street. And again, we're losing leases on 2 of those locations. Specifically, what we are proposing is an outpatient clinic, not an inpatient clinic. An outpatient clinic would be open Monday through Friday during the day. The exact hours are still being determined, but probably from about 8 a.m. to 5 or 5:30 p.m. The services that we're proposing to put there, number one, and this mirrors exactly what the need of the community, HIV care. We actually have an Institute for Advanced Medicine that provides primary care and HIV care, mostly for, but not exclusively for, the LGBT community. We are proposing to move the existing clinic currently located at St. Luke's, Morningside Heights Clinic, to 124th Street. That's the first bucket of services that would go there. The second bucket of services are mental health services. Again, these are certified by the Office of Mental Health. Several things fall under that category. Number one, we're proposing to open a partial hospitalization day program. That currently exists on the east side. We're losing a lease there. That is a program where an individual comes typically after they've been an inpatient for psychiatric care. They may not have progressed to the point where they can go solely to an outpatient setting, so they come on a daily basis, maybe for 3 hours, or maybe for 4 hours. They get intensive daily care, group therapy, individual therapy. They see their psychiatrist, they get their medication evaluated and changed. Partial hospitalization program. And then in addition to that, under the mental health bucket, and in a minute my colleagues will go into more detail, we're proposing adult and child outpatient psychiatric care. That could be for somebody who suffers from depression. It could be someone who has a bipolar disorder or some other mental illness. And again, they go on site, they may see their psychiatrist, they may see their therapist, or they may get group therapy. The third bucket of services that we're proposing to go have put there, and again, I lump this, they typically use the term behavioral health services. And these, what we're proposing here is 2 outpatient clinics, one for addictions and one for detox. And again, it is not methadone, it is someone who suffers from those ailments, and they will go and see their clinician. That's the services that are proposed. So that at a very high level is what we're proposing. I just want to look at my notes here. Oh, lease? Okay, I'll get to that. Again, we're leasing the site. We have signed a 30-year lease. Again, no methadone, no inpatients, it's outpatient, open Monday through Friday. So those are the key things. So I think now I'm going to have Dr. Singh come up. He's the psychiatry chair at Mount Sinai St. Luke's. He will expand a little bit upon what I said about the mental and behavioral health services. And when he's done, Matt Bain will come up. Matt is the executive director of the Institute for Advanced Medicine, which is our program for primary care and HIV care. So we'll talk a little more, and then we'll take it for questions.
Why no questions now? Let's question each of them.
Please, just write your questions down so we can get through the presentation. Thank you.
And we'll all be up here to answer the questions.
Good evening to everyone, and thank you for having us. I'm going to keep my remarks really brief so that we do have more time for questions, and you can question all of us in pairs or triplets or one at a time. We're more than happy to take. In fact, we invite you. First, I'd like to thank Sean for his presentation, because I think he did a great job at actually supporting the assertion that we've been making for a while, which is you don't need a methadone program. You're absolutely right. We're not putting a methadone program here. So thanks for that information, but it just supports the point that you don't need it. So
we're concerned about addicts, not mental health.
Keep going.
Let us finish, please.
I'm just going to describe the range of services, and then I'll pass it along to Matt Bain. So the range of services are...
I can't hear you.
Okay, sorry.
Is that better?
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
So the range of services that are covered under the behavioral health programs are, as Brad said, psychiatric treatment for folks that have the usual range of psychiatric disorders, be it depression, be it anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, all the things that will run through people's lives. They often occur, it's been pretty well known that it is good for people to receive their physical health and their mental health at one facility, and that many people who suffer particularly from heart disease and diabetes, it's no secret that they have very high incidences of both depression and anxiety disorders. That's a well-known fact, and I think having all this in one building is actually quite progressive. We don't have that currently. I think that'd be great when we're co-located. So we have services for adults. We have a clinic that is dedicated to the treatment of children. Again, it's a clinic. Treat kids from pretty much any age. Sometimes they start working with the moms before they have the babies if they know that they're vulnerable to something, and then they go on to treat kids until the age of about 18. We have a program called CARES, which I think Brad left out.
Yep, I did.
But it's actually a high school that's run by the Board of Ed and certified by the Office of Mental Health, as well as the Office of Alcoholism and Substance Use Services, OASIS, who you heard about before. So this is for kids that need to be in high school, haven't made it in the regular high school because of difficulties in one of those two areas, either with psychiatric illnesses or substance use disorders. And they come, there's about 70 of these kids on average who come to a high school that we have teachers. Essentially it's like a regular high school, except embedded within the high school are psychologists, social workers, and psychiatrists to serve the needs of those kids. Our addictions treatment program is actually really small. At current, it actually serves only about 100 patients. It is not a methadone treatment program. We do not plan to do actually detoxification there. We had thought about that. It's not something we do currently, and we will not be doing it in the future. So it's an outpatient addictions treatment program. And that pretty much is a range of psychiatric services. And again, I think we'll hold two questions.
So Matt, do you want to come on up now? Yep.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for making the time for us. I really take it as a great privilege to be here to talk to you about some of the things that we do within the Institute for Advanced Medicine. I am the executive director of our program. We, in my program, provide primary care and HIV primary care to the community. The overwhelming majority of patients within our program right now are drawn from East and Central Harlem, right in our own backyard. We provide, as I said, primary care, and primary care includes many of the things that were listed here already, including hypertension and diabetes and other chronic illnesses that we treat and screen for. We also have a very large HIV prevention arm of our program that goes out into the community. We are already working very closely with the faith-based communities up here to bring HIV testing out into the world, also STI screening, hepatitis screening. We do a lot of education and prevention work in those communities. We also will be able to expand upon our clinical trials that are available to patients because in some cases the treatments are no longer working for patients. New things are coming out. We want to do the best we can to take care of them. In our patient population that once again comes from geriatrics to pediatrics, it's a one-stop shopping for all of the family, which we think is really important. Another issue that I think is a really great benefit to our program is that we take insured and uninsured people. So if folks come to us and they don't have any insurance at all, and they don't have any way to get any treatment, we do it for free. We have a lot of grant-funded programs that are able to do that. We also help our folks get as much eligibility assistance as they possibly can to get the entitlements they actually need. I think we try our best to be very well-rounded and meet the needs of our patients, and we also do have community advisory boards and supervisory boards, and we really do try, as you guys have been mentioning all along, to meet the needs of our population. And I think that we make a better program when we listen to our patients, and they help us kind of develop where we're going to go and what kind of programs we're going to do. And I think we've done a great job, but we always can do better. And so I welcome any kind of feedback you guys can give me to help me do a better job on what we're trying to accomplish and really meet the needs of the folks that you deal with and the folks that you see and your friends and your family and anyone else, because we want to help. So that's us.
We'd like you to break your leads. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess we'll take questions, and I guess we want everybody to go to the mic so we hear you, and then depending what the question is, one of us will answer your question.
Yeah, I feel insulted because it seems like you didn't even hear what we were saying. It's not that we're opposed to the methadone program. We're opposed to a mental health program and all the other units that you mentioned. We are opposed to having any program that you're proposing in a block that is saturated with programs. So I'm insulted that you're not responding to what we're talking about. It seems like you're very programmed and you do it very well, listing all the services. But again, that's not the point. The point is find a location where there's not so many programs, and no one mentioned this. Across the street from all those programs in that block is residential area where people live. It's not a commercial district with just buildings. Now, I'm a resident of Harlem for almost 70 years. I've seen all the things happen to Harlem. We've always had programs. And this is ridiculous. And I feel similar to what Stanley said. A lot of times when you meet with the community at this point, it's already a done deal. You know, so I'm insulted. So I'm going to mobilize all the people I know. And since I've been living in this community for over 70 years, I know a lot of people that may not even be aware of what's going on. I'm going to try to mobilize them. We don't want any more programs in Harlem where there's already 4 or 5 existing programs near the same location or the same location. You said you were going to add the program as an addition to what's already there. We don't need additions.
This is no thank you, and we're not be able to answer everything everybody's saying, but we are not adding, we're moving existing programs.
Well, that's the same thing. I mean, do you know the game 3 called Monty? That's what you're doing here. That's just what you're doing. You're shuffling around different things
You have something to say? No. Oh, okay.
I know there is a great deal of passion in this sanctuary. I agree with you, brother.
Well, I'm glad you do. Let me finish. Let me finish.
I'm going to.
Let me
I
finish.
simply want us to be mindful of our time. Look behind you, man.
Okay, you didn't give me a time limit. If you gave me a time limit, I would adhere to the time.
I want you to finish. I want us, all of us who come subsequent, please, can we be mindful of about a 2-minute limit so that no disrespect to you, brother. No,
I'm not disrespecting you either.
No. So finish your point. And then let us, everyone who comes after you, let's be mindful of the time limit, okay? So that everyone can have to. Finish what you're saying.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what you said, yeah, I'm very passionate about it.
I agree with you.
Okay?
I agree with you.
I'm very passionate. And I think a lot of these people are very passionate about it also. And I hope that the people here, that the passion turns into being active.
That's right.
Yes.
Okay? Turn the passion into being active.
That's right.
Thank you.
I'm going to look at this from a slightly different perspective, which is if I were a parent of a medical patient of specifically the mental health services, I would be extraordinarily upset to have my child going to services on a block that was dense with methadone clinics and dense with homeless shelters, knowing that self-medication is a real risk. As a one of your constituents, I would feel, my God, why didn't they pick another place?
Okay, I'm going to make 3 points, and the first one is a relatively small point, then I'll make larger points. The small point is that one of the addresses you gave where you're moving facilities from Harlem, a Harlem location, to another Harlem location, namely 124th Street. One of those addresses was in Morningside Heights, and you don't have to explain it. It's just part and parcel and reflective of the way we have been double talked to, lied to, and talked down to for decades. Oversaturation. It seems that the word is not getting through. There are 2 other things. All of the facility owners on that block, which I am very familiar with, I have relatives, friends, colleagues, etc., who live on that block. You're all bad neighbors. You're very bad neighbors. You do nothing of note or that in any way approaches adequacy in terms of managing and working with your clientele. We're not happy with the clients at your facilities who have needs that we recognize, but we're not happy with their urinating and defecating and bothering young women and young men and so on our neighborhood. We're not happy that drug dealers come from who knows where to offer product to the clients of your facilities. Where are your management skills?